The police lights flashed red and blue, cutting through the quiet night street. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." The woman's hands trembled as she rolled down the window. She hadn't been speeding. Her tail light worked. She hadn't done anything wrong. Two officers approached anyway. One hand rested a little too close to a holster. "License and registration." She complied, heart pounding, when headlights suddenly washed over all of them. A black luxury SUV pulled up behind the patrol car. The engine didn't shut off. A man stepped out. Calm, unhurried, deadly quiet. He looked at the officers, then at the woman. "Honey," he said softly, "are they giving you trouble?" The officers froze because they recognized him, the face from sealed files, the name never said out loud, the man everyone knew but no one pulled over. And in that moment, the power completely shifted. Backhand index pointing right, stay till the end, because this traffic stop would expose corruption, fear, and why some laws only apply to the weak. The street was almost empty. Just one long stretch of asphalt cutting through the quiet suburban neighborhood, streetlights spaced far apart, casting pale yellow pools on the road. It was close to midnight, late enough that everything felt fragile, like the city was holding its breath. Rachel Moore drove with both hands on the wheel. She wasn't speeding, she hadn't been drinking. Her headlights were on, her seatbelt fastened, her phone untouched in the cup holder. She was just tired. A double shift at the hospital would do that to anyone. 12 hours on her feet, barely enough time to eat, too exhausted to think. All she wanted was to get home, take off her shoes, and crawl into bed beside her husband. That was when the lights appeared, red, blue, flashing violently in her rearview mirror. Rachel's heart jumped. "What?" she whispered to herself. She glanced at the speedometer, perfectly legal, checked her mirrors. Signals, everything was fine. Still, the patrol car closed in behind her, lights blazing. She pulled over immediately, parking beneath a streetlight. The night suddenly felt very quiet. Rachel swallowed hard and lowered her window. Two officers stepped out of the cruiser, both men, mid-30s maybe. One tall and broad-shouldered, the other slimmer, eyes sharp and restless. The taller one approached her window. "Evening, ma'am," he said, voice neutral but eyes assessing. "Step out of the vehicle." Rachel blinked. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Just step out of the vehicle," he repeated. Her pulse quickened. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The second officer shifted closer, hand resting just a little too near his holster. "Ma'am," he said impatiently, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." Rachel's throat went dry. She complied. Stepping out into the cool night air, she folded her arms tightly around herself, suddenly aware of how alone she was on that dark street. The taller officer circled her car slowly, shining a flashlight through the windows. "License and registration," he said. Rachel handed them over with trembling fingers. The second officer studied her face. "Where you coming from?" "Work," Rachel replied. "I'm a nurse at St. Andrews. At midnight?" he asked skeptically. "Yes," she said, trying not to sound defensive. "I worked a double." The officer exchanged a glance with his partner. "And where you headed?" "Home. Where's that?" Rachel gave the address. The taller officer paused slightly when he heard it, then continued his slow inspection of the car. "You live alone?" the second officer asked. "No," Rachel replied. "My husband, doesn't matter," he cut in. Rachel's stomach twisted. The taller officer returned, holding her license loosely between two fingers. "Mind telling us why your vehicle smells like alcohol?" Rachel's eyes widened. "It doesn't, I don't drink." "You sure about that?" the officer pressed. "Yes," she said firmly now, "I'm sure." The second officer smirked faintly. "You sure you're not hiding something?" Rachel felt heat rise to her face, fear mixed with anger. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said. "Why did you pull me over?" The taller officer leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Because we can." The words landed like a slap. Rachel's heart pounded in her ears. Before she could respond, headlights flooded the scene. Bright, powerful, unmistakably expensive. A black SUV rolled to a smooth stop behind the patrol car. The engine didn't turn off. Both officers turned instinctively. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He moved calmly, deliberately, as if the flashing lights meant nothing to him. He wore a dark coat over a tailored suit, no tie, hands relaxed at his sides. His presence seemed to drain the noise from the world. Rachel felt it before she understood it. The shift. The man walked toward them, eyes first on Rachel. "Ratch," he said softly. "You okay?" Her breath caught. "Daniel," she whispered. He stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I asked if you're okay," he repeated gently. I think so," she said. "They pulled me over, I don't know why." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. He turned his gaze to the officers. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "is there a problem with my wife?" The taller officer straightened. "Sir, this is a routine traffic stop," he said quickly. "You'll need to step back." Daniel didn't move. Instead, he reached out and placed a reassuring hand on Rachel's shoulder. "She hasn't done anything wrong," Daniel said. "So I'll ask again, why is she out of her car?" The second officer's eyes narrowed as he studied Daniel's face more closely. Then his expression changed. Suddenly, he took a half step back. The taller officer followed his gaze and froze. Color drained from his face. Daniel noticed. So did Rachel. Recognition flickered between the two officers, unspoken but unmistakable. "Sir," the taller officer said, his tone shifting abruptly, "we didn't realize." "Realize what?" Daniel asked quietly. The second officer swallowed. "Who you were." Silence fell heavy over the street. Daniel's voice dropped, dangerously calm. "Then you might want to start explaining," he said, "why two armed officers pulled my wife out of her car with no cause." Rachel looked up at her husband, confusion swirling in her chest, who he was. She had known Daniel Moore for 5 years, thought she knew him. But the way the officers stood now, rigid, nervous, suddenly respectful, it told her there was something she didn't know, something powerful, something dangerous. And whatever it was, it had just turned this routine traffic stop into something else entirely. The moment Daniel Moore stepped out of the SUV, the air changed. It wasn't dramatic in the way movies made it seem. There was no shouting, no weapons drawn, no sudden violence. It was quieter than that, more unsettling. Like the temperature dropping without warning, Rachel felt it in the way the officer's shoulders stiffened, in the way the slimmer one took a subtle step back, in the way the taller officer's hand dropped away from his belt. Daniel walked toward them unhurriedly, shoes clicking softly against the pavement. He stopped beside Rachel, close enough that she could smell his familiar cologne, clean, understated, comforting. "Ratch," he said again, gently, "did they tell you why they stopped you?" She shook her head. "No." Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He turned to the officers. "Then I'll ask a third time," he said calmly. "What's the reason for the stop?" The tall officer cleared his throat. "Sir, it was just a routine." "Routine stops require cause," Daniel interrupted, still calm. "Speeding, equipment failure, suspicion of a crime, which one applies?" The slimmer officer swallowed. We thought we smelled alcohol," he said. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "You thought?" Rachel looked up at her husband, confusion swirling. She had never heard him speak like this, measured, precise, quietly dominant. "You're welcome to run a test," Daniel continued. "Or you can return her license and explain why she was asked to step out of the vehicle without cause." The tall officer hesitated, then, slowly, he handed Rachel's license back. "We didn't realize who you were," he said carefully. Daniel's expression didn't change. But Rachel felt the shift in him, like a door closing. "And who do you think I am?" Daniel asked. The slimmer officer glanced at his partner, then back at Daniel. "Mr. Moore." Rachel's heart skipped. They knew his name. Daniel nodded once. "That's correct." The tall officer exhaled, trying to recover. "Sir, there's no issue here, just a misunderstanding." Daniel took a small step forward. "There is an issue," he said softly. "Because two officers pulled my wife out of her car on an empty road, implied she was intoxicated, and offered no legal reason for doing so." Rachel's breath caught at the word wife, the way he said it. Possessive, yes, but also protective in a way she'd never seen before. You can leave, Daniel added. Now, the officers didn't argue. They nodded stiffly, retreated to their cruiser, and drove off without another word. The red and blue lights disappeared down the road. Silence rushed in to fill the space they left behind. Rachel turned to Daniel, heart pounding. What was that? She asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He scanned the street, then gently took her shoulders, guiding her back toward her car. His touch was warm, grounding. Get in, he said softly. I'll drive. She didn't argue. Inside the car, Rachel sat rigid, gripping her seatbelt as Daniel slid into the driver's seat. He started the engine and pulled back onto the road smoothly as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But everything had. A mile passed in silence. Then finally Rachel spoke. They knew you, she said. The police, they recognized you. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. Yes. Why? She asked. Daniel, what aren't you telling me? He exhaled slowly. There are parts of my life, he said carefully, that I kept separate to keep you safe. Her chest tightened. From what? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled into a quiet overlook near the river and parked. The city lights shimmered on the dark water below. He turned off the engine. Rachel turned toward him fully. Talk to me. Daniel rested his hands on the steering wheel, fingers laced together. I don't work in logistics, he said quietly. Rachel blinked. What? I never did, he continued. That's just the version of the truth I gave you. Her mouth went dry. What do you do then? Daniel finally looked at her. I run things, he said. Rachel stared at him, waiting for him to laugh. He didn't. Run what? She whispered. Daniel's voice was steady. People, money, territory. Her pulse roared in her ears. You're saying, she stopped, afraid to finish the sentence. Yes, Daniel said. I'm saying exactly what you think I'm saying. Rachel shook her head slowly. No, that's not possible. You volunteer at the shelter, you fix our sink, you complain about traffic. Daniel's lips twitched faintly. I'm still a person, Rachel. A dangerous one. She asked. He didn't deny it. The silence stretched. Finally, she asked, is that why they backed off? Daniel nodded. They knew pulling you over like that could cost them their careers or worse. Rachel felt sick. So if you hadn't shown up, they would have kept pushing, Daniel said quietly, because they thought they could. Anger flared through her fear. That's not right. No, Daniel agreed, it's not. She stared out the windshield, trying to reconcile the man beside her with the man she thought she knew. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Daniel's voice softened. Because once you know, you can't unknow it, and I wanted you to have a normal life. Rachel laughed weakly. Normal? Daniel reached out, stopping just short of touching her hand. I would never let anyone hurt you, he said. Tonight proved that. Rachel turned back to him, eyes searching his. And if one day you're the danger, she asked. Daniel met her gaze without flinching. Then you walk away, he said. No questions, no guilt. Her heart twisted. She believed him, but belief didn't erase fear. As they pulled back onto the road, Rachel realized something terrifying. That traffic stop hadn't been random. And if the police knew who Daniel was, others might too. Whatever life she'd been living until tonight, it was already over. And Act 3 would reveal why she'd been pulled over in the first place. Rachel didn't sleep that night. Even after Daniel parked the car safely in their driveway, even after he locked every door and double-checked the windows like he always did, her mind refused to slow down. The house felt different, too quiet, too exposed. She lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling while Daniel's breathing stayed slow and controlled as if nothing had happened. That unsettled her more than fear would have. At 3:17 a.m., she finally spoke. They weren't random, she said softly. Daniel didn't pretend to be asleep. No, he replied, they were. Rachel turned onto her side, facing him. You knew that already, didn't you? Daniel hesitated just long enough to tell her the truth. I suspected, he said, but now I'm sure. She sat up slightly. Sure of what? Daniel sighed and pushed himself upright, resting his elbows on his knees. Those officers weren't fishing, he said. They were sent. Rachel's stomach dropped. Sent by who? Daniel rubbed his hands together slowly like he was organizing his thoughts. By people who think I've gone soft. She stared at him. Because you married a nurse? A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. Because I married someone outside my world. Rachel folded her arms tightly around herself. So they targeted me. Yes, Daniel said simply. The word landed heavy. Why? She demanded. What did they want? To see how I'd respond, Daniel replied. To remind me I'm being watched, and to see how much pressure it would take before you broke. Rachel felt anger flare sharp and hot. They used the police, she said. That's illegal. Daniel's expression darkened. So is most of what they do. By morning, Daniel's phone hadn't stopped buzzing, messages he didn't answer, calls he let ring out. Rachel watched him from the kitchen as he poured coffee he didn't drink, jaw tight, eyes distant. You're not going to work, she said. Daniel shook his head. No, good, she snapped. Because if someone thinks harassing your wife is a message, you don't get to pretend this is normal. Daniel met her gaze. I never said it was. A knock sounded at the door. Rachel froze. Daniel was already moving. Stay here, he said quietly. She ignored him and followed anyway, heart pounding as he opened the door. A man stood on the porch, older, gray-haired, well-dressed in an understated way that screamed money and control. His eyes flicked briefly to Rachel before returning to Daniel. Daniel, the man said, we need to talk. Daniel's voice was cold. You don't get to show up at my house. Last night made it personal, the man replied calmly. You know that. Rachel's blood ran cold. Daniel stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Rachel stayed close enough to hear through the wood. That stop wasn't authorized, Daniel said. You crossed a line. The man chuckled softly. You've crossed many. Rachel's fists clenched. You think using uniformed cops to intimidate my wife was smart? Daniel continued. I think it was effective, the man said. She's scared. Daniel's voice dropped dangerously. She's angry. Silence stretched. Finally, the man spoke again. There's a shipment coming through next week. You're sitting it out. Daniel laughed once, short and sharp. No, you don't have a choice, the man replied. You've grown sentimental. That makes you unpredictable. Rachel pressed her hand to the door, shaking. She's not leverage, Daniel said. She's my line. That's the problem, the man replied. You used to have none. A pause, then Daniel said very quietly, get off my property. The man didn't argue. Think carefully, he said instead. Because next time I won't send warnings. The footsteps retreated. Rachel opened the door before Daniel could stop her. That man threatened me, she said, voice trembling with fury. Daniel looked at her, eyes heavy. Yes. And you let him walk away, for now, Daniel said. For now, Rachel snapped. Daniel, they abused their power, they used the police. That could have ended with me in handcuffs or worse. Daniel stepped closer. I know, then do something, she said, not your way, the right way. Daniel studied her, surprised. You want me to go to the authorities? He asked. I want you to stop letting corrupt men decide who gets hurt, Rachel replied. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. You don't understand how this works, he said finally. Rachel met his gaze without flinching. Then explain it. Daniel exhaled slowly. The officers who stopped you, they're dirty, he said. They've been taking payments to harass people, intimidation, false stops, planted evidence. Civilians, business owners, anyone inconvenient. Rachel's eyes widened. And no one stopped them? Anyone who tried ended up fired, Daniel replied, or worse. Rachel swallowed. So last night was practice. Yes, Daniel said. For something bigger. A chill ran down her spine. They wanted to see if I'd use violence, Daniel continued. If I still solved problems the old way. And if you had, Rachel asked quietly. They would have smiled and said nothing, Daniel replied. Because that's the man they want me to be. Rachel shook her head slowly. So what are you going to do? Daniel looked at her, really looked. For the first time, he said, I'm going to do this clean. Her breath caught. You mean legally? As legally as possible, he said. I have records, payments, names, proof those officers have been shaking people down. Rachel stared at him. You could destroy them. Yes, Daniel said, and the men who sent them. A beat. But if I do this, he continued, there will be consequences. Rachel didn't hesitate. There already are. Daniel reached for her hand. This time she didn't pull away. They stopped you because they thought you were weak, she said. They were wrong. Daniel's grip tightened. That afternoon, Rachel gave a statement. Not to the police. To a federal oversight hotline Daniel trusted, one of the few channels not already compromised. She described everything. The lack of cause, the tone, the threat. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. When she finished, the line went quiet. Then the voice on the other end said, Thank you, this isn't the first report. Rachel looked at Daniel, eyes blazing. This ends, she said. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, he agreed. It does. Outside, the city moved as usual, cars, people, routines unchanged. But somewhere beneath it all, something dangerous had been exposed. The traffic stop wasn't about control, it was about testing boundaries. And in Act 4, those boundaries would finally be crossed by both sides. The fallout didn't come with sirens, it came with silence. By the next morning, two things were clear. Someone had heard Rachel's report, and someone was very unhappy about it. Daniel noticed it first when his usual channels went quiet. Messages left unread, contacts suddenly unavailable. The kind of silence that wasn't accidental but strategic. Rachel felt it too. The neighborhood looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. A car idled too long at the corner. A man walked past the house twice in under an hour. Small things, easy to dismiss, impossible to ignore. They know, Rachel said quietly, standing at the window. Daniel didn't deny it. Yes, and she pressed. What happens now? Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes hard. Now they decide whether intimidation is enough. Rachel turned to him, and if it's not, Daniel's jaw tightened. Then they escalate. The word hung heavy between them. That afternoon, the escalation came. Rachel was folding laundry when Daniel's phone rang. One look at the screen was enough to change his posture entirely. Pack a bag, he said calmly. We're leaving. Rachel's heart jumped. Leaving where? Anywhere but here, Daniel replied. For tonight. She didn't argue. An hour later, they were on the road, heading toward a small lakeside town Daniel owned property in under a shell company. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't fortified. It was quiet. And that made it safer for now. As soon as they arrived, Daniel locked the doors and checked the perimeter with a precision Rachel had never seen before. This wasn't the man who forgot to take the trash out. This was someone who had survived by anticipating threats before they happened. You've lived like this the whole time, Rachel said softly. Daniel paused. I stopped when I married you. Her chest tightened. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed again. He answered without greeting. Don't, he said immediately. Rachel watched his face darken as he listened. No, Daniel repeated. You already crossed that line. A pause, then Daniel's voice dropped to something cold and sharp. If you touch her again, there will be consequences you can't buy your way out of. He ended the call. Rachel stared at him. Who was that? Daniel didn't hesitate. The man who ordered the stop. Fear flickered through her, but anger burned hotter. What did he want? She asked. To make sure I understood the cost of defiance, Daniel replied. Rachel stepped closer. And do you? Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. And I'm willing to pay it. That night Daniel made his move, not with violence, with exposure. He sent the files, payment trails, surveillance logs, bodycam timestamps that didn't match official reports, internal messages between officers and intermediaries, enough to destroy careers, enough to start investigations. Enough to make people talk. Rachel sat beside him as he worked, watching the man she loved dismantle a system piece by piece. You're burning bridges, she said. Daniel nodded. I'm building something else. Within hours, the response came. Unmarked cars appeared outside police precincts across the city. Phones rang in offices that hadn't heard from oversight in years. Internal affairs units that had been asleep woke up fast. By morning, 2 officers were placed on administrative leave. By noon, 4 more. By evening, the man who had stood on Daniel's porch was no longer answering his phone. Rachel watched the news coverage in stunned silence. They're calling it an internal investigation, she said. They're actually doing it. Daniel's expression remained guarded. Don't celebrate yet. As if on cue, his phone buzzed again. This time the message was short. You chose wrong. Rachel felt a chill crawl up her spine. Daniel showed her the screen. This is the part I didn't want for you. She met his gaze. You don't get to protect me by lying anymore. He studied her, then nodded slowly. Fair, he said. That night, someone tried to break into the lake house. It wasn't subtle. The sound of glass shattering cut through the quiet like a gunshot. Rachel screamed as Daniel pulled her down behind the couch, already moving with lethal efficiency. Stay down, he ordered. Footsteps crunched on broken glass. Daniel didn't draw a gun. He didn't need to. The intruder fled the moment lights snapped on and a security alarm began screaming into the night. By the time local police arrived, different officers this time, the threat was gone. Rachel sat wrapped in a blanket, shaking. This is what they do, Daniel said quietly. When power slips, they lash out. Rachel looked up at him, eyes wet but fierce. Then don't let it slip back. Daniel knelt in front of her. I need to ask you something, he said. She nodded. If this keeps going, he continued, if it gets worse, I might have to step away completely, disappear to keep you safe. Rachel's breath hitched. And what about you? She asked. Daniel smiled faintly. I've lived many lives. Rachel shook her head. I don't want a life where you're a ghost. Daniel reached out, taking her hands. And I don't want a life where you're afraid, he said. They held each other in the quiet aftermath, the weight of choices pressing down on them both. Outside, the lake reflected the moonlight, calm and indifferent. The storm wasn't over, but the lines had been drawn. And in Act 5, the question would no longer be who had power, but who was willing to let it go. The storm didn't break all at once. It unraveled. Over the next 2 weeks, the city changed in ways most people barely noticed, but Rachel felt every shift like a pulse beneath her skin. Unmarked cars became marked ones. Quiet suspensions turned into public removals. Names that had once carried authority were suddenly spoken with caution. The officers who pulled Rachel over were officially charged with misconduct. Not quietly, publicly. Rachel watched the press conference on a muted television while folding laundry at the lake house. The chief's words scrolled beneath his image. Abuse of power, ongoing investigation, federal oversight. She exhaled shakily. It's real, she whispered. Daniel stood behind her, arms folded, eyes unreadable. It has to be, he said. Otherwise it was all for nothing. Rachel turned to face him. And the people above them? Daniel hesitated. Some will fall, some will disappear. That's how systems protect themselves. She nodded. And you? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the window, staring out at the calm water. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. I've been offered a deal, he said. Rachel's stomach tightened. What kind of deal? Immunity, Daniel replied. Partial cooperation, enough information to collapse the rest of the network without dragging me into court. Rachel stared at him. That's good, right? Daniel turned back to her. It comes with conditions. Her heart sank. Such as, I disappear, Daniel said, officially. I give up everything that ties me to influence. No public life, no leverage, no protection. Rachel swallowed hard. And us? Daniel's jaw tightened. That's the risk. Silence filled the room. Rachel sat down slowly, the weight of it pressing on her chest. So this is it, she said softly. The price? Daniel nodded. I can't have a normal life and dismantle the one I built. I have to choose. Rachel stood and walked toward him, stopping just inches away. Then choose me, she said. Daniel looked at her, eyes dark and searching. If I stay, they'll never stop watching you. Rachel shook her head. They already were. I'm not going back to living small because men with power think they own the road. Daniel reached for her hands. I don't want you to pay for my past. Rachel squeezed his fingers. Then don't make me pay for your absence. For the first time since the traffic stop, Daniel looked uncertain. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the quiet, no sirens, no alarms, just the gentle sound of water lapping at the shore. She thought about the life she'd built, the job she loved, the man she married, and the line she'd crossed without knowing it. In the early morning, she made her decision. 3 months later, Rachel stood in a small courtroom, not as a defendant, not as a victim, but as a witness. She told the truth about the stop, about the intimidation, about how power had tried to make her feel small. Daniel sat behind her, no longer hidden, no longer untouchable. Just a man in a plain suit, hands folded, eyes fixed on her with something close to awe. When she finished, the judge nodded once. Thank you, Ms. Moore, he said. You may step down. Rachel walked back to Daniel, her legs shaking. You were incredible, he whispered. She smiled faintly. I was honest. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. Daniel ignored them, so did Rachel. They got into their car and drove away. Life didn't become perfect. Daniel didn't magically turn into someone else overnight, but things changed. He stepped back from everything that had once defined him, cut ties, closed accounts, handed over what he knew. The deal held. Rachel returned to work. The first time she drove home alone again, her hands shook on the wheel, but no lights appeared behind her. Weeks passed, then months. The lake house became home. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the water gold, Rachel sat on the dock beside Daniel, feet dangling just above the surface. Do you miss it? She asked quietly. Daniel considered the question. Sometimes. Do you regret it? She asked. He shook his head. Never. Rachel leaned her head against his shoulder. They froze when you showed up that night. Daniel smiled faintly. I froze too. She looked up at him, surprised. You did? Yes, he said. Because I realized power didn't matter if it couldn't protect the person I loved. Rachel laughed softly. Took you long enough. Daniel kissed her forehead. You changed the rules. She thought back to that night, the lights, the fear, the way everything had felt stacked against her. And you chose not to use fear back, she said. Daniel nodded. That's the hardest choice. The water rippled gently beneath them. Somewhere far away, the city kept moving, new scandals, new names, new power struggles. But here, on the edge of a quiet lake, none of that mattered. Because one woman had refused to be intimidated. One man had chosen accountability over control, and a traffic stop that should have been forgotten had become the moment everything changed.